Thank you all for coming in today, and thank you, Venerable, for leading us today through the teachings of Acharya Dharma Rakshita's Wheel of Sharp Weapons. And yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you for taking time out of your busy weekend to commit yourself to Dharma practice. That's so wonderful. Let's take a moment to be very intentional with our mind and with our space, wherever we are. Let's let all of the worldly activities we've been doing all day, all the running around we've been doing, both physical and mental, put that all to the side. Let ourselves be fully, completely present here now. Doesn't matter where we are. It could be in your living room or your office or your kitchen or your bedroom. It doesn't matter. We just take a moment to create a very intentional space for ourselves that puts all of our worldly activities aside so we can focus on the Dharma, so we can focus on our mind, right? And having done that, let's set a motivation for our time together this evening. So think that the reason I have come to this class this evening, the reason I have chosen to study the Dharma, to practice the Dharma, to learn this wonderful mind training text, is not merely to benefit myself alone, but it is so that I might be able to develop my mind in such a way that I might be able to improve my life in such a way, increase my wisdom and my compassion, so that I might be of more benefit to other sentient beings. So any short-term or temporary goals of looking for happiness or contentment or peace in this life, those are fine, but those aren't the real reason we practice Dharma. Those are temporary short-term goals. The real goal that we need to let infuse all of our practice, especially when we are focusing on the teachings, as we are this evening, is that may my continued study, practice, and meditation propel me towards Buddhahood so that I might become a perfectly complete Buddha and be able to free all sentient beings from suffering. May all of my activities lead me towards that state. And so set the strong motivation that the reason we're here is so we can become Buddhas as quickly as possible, so that we might be able to get rid of our self-cherishing minds and work for the benefit of others. And as we set that motivation, let's offer some preliminary prayers. So we'll offer first this refuge and bodhicitta prayer, which we'll do 3 times in Tibetan, and then once in English, and then we'll continue in English. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinso gi pesonam gi jola penjer sangye drupar shok. Sangye cheran soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinso gi pesonam gi drola penjer sangye drupar shok. Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu bardu dagni kyabsu chi dagi jinso gi pesonam gi drola penchir sangye drupar shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. We'll offer a short mandala offering. So we visualize the entire universe, the whole cosmos. We visualize that and we purify it so that it has no faults, no stains. And we offer that to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas on behalf of all sentient beings. We'll offer this once in Tibetan and then once in English. Sashipiki Joshing Medo Trimirablishi Nindegem Pandi Sange Shindu Mikte Uai Drokin Shila Chim Parjo. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme God of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you, who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, An illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, sea, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And lastly, we'll offer the Heart Sutra, which is just to remind ourselves of the importance of understanding emptiness, which is the antidote to our self-grasping mind. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear one time the Bhagwan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara said this to the venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagwan, having thus spoken, the venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed in how they praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagawan. And finally, we'll offer a prayer to avert hindrances. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis in the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her only child. Akasamartha Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamartha Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamartha. Akasamartha Shadara Samaraya Pe, Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Swaha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may the inner and outer hindrances be transformed. May they be dispelled. May they be pacified. Shintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from the problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you so much for that. So as usual, I'll just remind people of our question policy. I won't see any questions that you put in the chat, and I won't see if you raise your hands. So if you have a question about anything as we're going along, you're welcome to interrupt me and to ask that question. Try to keep it on topic with whatever verse we're discussing at the moment, or wherever we are in our discussion. And if you have a question that is somewhat off topic, we'll have time at the end to try to tie everything together. So I encourage, if you can save your question to the end, there'll be time. But if it is important regarding whatever it is I'm talking about, then feel free to interrupt me. That's fine. And as we go about our study today, as always, we should try to adopt the appropriate attitude for engaging in Dharma and for study, right? The appropriate attitude of a student. And so there are three attitudes I encourage us to cultivate, to think of very explicitly at this moment. The first one is an attitude that we call the long-ranging attitude, or the big picture attitude, right? And this is the attitude that recognizes that my goal is to become a Buddha. That's not a short-term goal. That's a long-term goal, okay? That is not going to happen overnight, that this is a long-term kind of project. And so I have to keep the big picture in view. I can't get caught up on too many small things and let too many small obstacles derail me. I always have to keep the bigger picture as my focus, okay? So that's the long-term attitude, or the big picture attitude. So we need to cultivate that, right? At the same time, we have to cultivate what we call the broad or extensive attitude. And this is the attitude that recognizes that on the path to Buddhahood, there are many steps. There are lots of things that we have to study. There isn't, one simple practice that we can do that will get us from where we are now, suffering in samsara, to perfect, complete Buddhas. There are lots of different aspects of the path, and they all work together, right? They all fit into one another. They're not disparate, but we do have to study them separately. And as we study them separately, then we start fitting them together and seeing how they work together. But it takes a lot of different pieces that we have to study, right? So it is not only a long-term commitment and a big picture that we need to keep sight of, but we have to keep sight of, we need many different pieces to this puzzle, okay? That's the extensive or the broad attitude. But then lastly, we have to cultivate the relaxed attitude, the attitude that realizes that yes, there are many different things we need to study. That yes, we are suffering in samsara right now, and to get from here to Buddhahood is a long journey. But we can't be so uptight that we stress out. We have to be relaxed, which isn't to say we make excuses for ourselves, right? It isn't to say that we don't practice because it's inconvenient. No, we practice all the time, but we recognize that we are sentient beings who are suffering in samsara, doing the best we can. Okay? And the best I can do today may not be the same as the best I can do tomorrow, or the best I could do yesterday. So I always have to give as much effort as I can. I always have to be pushing myself slightly out of my comfort zone, but I have to recognize that I can't grasp onto things too tightly and expect myself to be perfect right from the beginning, because that's impossible. If I could just read a text, understand it immediately, and then practice it immediately, and not have to, struggle with the text, not have to contemplate the text, not have to meditate on the text, if it could just be instantaneous, if it was that easy, we'd all be Buddhas already, right? We wouldn't have to go through all this work, all this effort. So we have to have a relaxed attitude to accompany the long-term attitude, or the big picture attitude, and the extensive attitude. Because if we don't have that relaxed attitude, what can happen is we just get burnt out, right? We look at the task ahead of us and we say, this is impossible. I can't do it. Or I made effort and, I've been meditating for however long. I've been meditating for a month or for a year or for a decade, and I haven't, achieved my goals yet, right? Therefore, there's no point. I can't do it anymore. Or, the Dharma center that I've been visiting, I've been there for a decade, and I'm getting arguments with all of my Dharma siblings, and I'm getting frustrated, and I can't do it anymore. That's very easy, right? To have that kind of burnt out attitude. So we need to be able to relax and recognize this is samsara. We are suffering sentient beings doing the best we can with whatever resources we have. And that's going to change every day. So I encourage you to remind yourself of these three attitudes, especially when you go about studying, or when you go about engaging in your daily practice, to remember that we need to adopt all the time the big picture view, the extensive view, and the relaxed view, right? Otherwise, we will, be focusing on the finger that points at the moon instead of the moon itself, as they say. Now, with that said, this idea of relaxation is an important one to talk about, especially when we're talking about mind training, which is what we're going to be talking about today, because it's easy to read all these mind training pieces of advice, all of these kind of pithy statements that look at the self-cherishing mind and say, well, I'm doing my best, so it's okay if once in a while I devolve. It's okay if once in a while I gossip, or once in a while I am selfish. Once in a while I follow my self-cherishing mind. We can have that mistaken view. That's not what we mean by relaxation, right? So when I say we have to have a relaxed view or a relaxed attitude, that's important, but it can't be at the expense of our Dharma practice. Do you know what I mean? So recognizing that we're human beings that are doing our best doesn't mean actively seeking out non-virtue. It doesn't mean giving up our practice. You know, when you become when you take ordination, as part of the ordination ceremony, it says very clearly that one of the questions you're asked is, are you taking these vows not just for when you're healthy, but also for when you're sick? Not just for when you have wealth and goods, but also when you are poor and you are in need. Are you taking these vows not just when it's convenient, but also when it's inconvenient, right? I mean, so as someone who takes vow as an ordained person, I specifically have to answer to that. Um, and it's the same with all of our practice, whether you're ordained or not. This practice is supposed to keep us buoyant when we're going through difficulties. And yet, when we go through difficulties, that's often when we put it aside because we don't have time for it, because we haven't prioritized it in our life in a meaningful way. And to be fair, most of us are new to Dharma, right? We met it as adults. It isn't our habit in this life. So we're still trying to build a habit where our first instinct is to turn to the Dharma. And we don't have that yet. That's a muscle that we need to work out. Okay. So it's understandable that when things get overwhelmed, one of the first things we do is we stop attending the Dharma teachings, or we stop our daily meditation practice, or we stop our daily study of the texts, whatever it may be, right? That's understandable because this isn't a muscle that we've really worked out as much as we would like to. But just because it's understandable doesn't mean that that's the right approach. So when you feel yourself overwhelmed, you should remember, do your best to remind yourself that my Dharma practice, the whole purpose of it, whether it's highly regimented and, depending on what kind of personality you have, you might have like a very regimented and detailed Dharma practice, or it might be more kind of holistic and open-ended, depending on what advice you've been given. Whatever kind of practice you have, the purpose of your practice is to integrate the Dharma into your everyday life, right? So the purpose of our practice is specifically to help us when we're going through those difficult things, right? When we're going through all of the travails of life, we should have Dharma to lift us up, to help us out of the muck of samsara, to remind us that this is what it means to be a suffering sentient being. I don't want this for myself or for others. Therefore, I am going to continually work on my mind so I don't experience this anymore. And so I can help others be free from this as well. That's what the Dharma does. The Dharma lifts us up, right? It isn't something that holds us down. It isn't something that we add on to our everyday life. Dharma should be our everyday life. And now the way that manifests is going to be different depending on what we're doing every day. But that's what we have to think of. The Dharma shouldn't be something we add on top of, right? It's not a flavor that we mix in with whatever, our meal is that day. The Dharma is the meal. Everything else is the seasoning. And so what is the goal of our study and practice, right? The goal of our study and practice, as I said, is to integrate Dharma into everything we do to such an extent that we don't think about it anymore, okay? And one of the reasons I love mind training so much is that mind training gives us these really pithy ways to do that. The section in the text that we're at right now is pointing out all these different ways that the self-cherishing mind can manifest throughout our day, right? And as we mentioned last week, some of them may not apply to us at all. You might read some of these verses and say, oh, that's not something I do. That's not a trap that I've fallen into anymore. And that's great. That's a wonderful opportunity to rejoice that you don't have that particular type of self-cherishing active in your continuum. But the chances are many of the other ones you do have. Or I can at least speak for me to say that I do have, right? And they're not all the time. They're not what's leading my day all the time, but they're there. And the purpose of the text like this is to point them out to us so I can become aware of them. Because if I want to be free from the self-cherishing mind, which is the cause of all my suffering, I have to be aware of it. I have to see how it is infiltrating my everyday activities, right? How it's hijacked my life, which is what the self-cherishing mind does, right? And so mind training, it doesn't give us any easy way out, you know? Mind training is very direct in that way. It it's like a mirror that you're staring right at your face. It's not even like a mirror. It's like, I don't know if anyone has ever the magnified mirrors that you use like when you're putting on makeup or something. So you look at this mirror and instead of seeing your face, you see your face magnified 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. That's what Dharma is, and that's what mind training is. It's showing you everything in crystal clear clarity. Okay. And that it can be hard sometimes. Mind training isn't the first practice we recommend to everyone that's coming to the Dharma, right? But that's why this is a more advanced class because you've done training. You already understand the basics and you're looking for a different type of practice. And so a text like this and a teaching like this and the mind training meditation style is something we can bring into our life that um, we can find ways to integrate it into everything we do, right? We can stand up to all of our bad habits, which right now, our bad habits are really strong. And mind training is giving us the tools to stand up to them. Because mind training isn't just pointing out our flaws, right? That it would be, if that's all it was, then, we could go find someone to do that for us. There's plenty of people who would love to criticize me left, right, and center. I don't have to do it to myself. What mind training is doing is mind training is actually a source of profound psychological exploration. Okay. And what I mean by that is, so we've been studying this text for a few months, right? How many of you have actually, throughout your week, tried to incorporate these verses into your life? How many times have you looked at your activity and said, that's the self cherishing mind causing this? I don't expect you to answer me, but that's a rhetorical question. I want you to think about it. Have you actually tried to look at your activities of body, speech, and mind, as you've been studying this text and tried to analyze how many of these are really motivated by the self cherishing mind, the mind that wants me to be happy and considers my happiness more important than anyone else's happiness? And if you have tried to actively do that work, how did that feel? That is the important question, you know? What did it feel like when you noticed your mind was leading you places that weren't beneficial, that your mind was hijacking your everyday activities and causing you suffering? Mind training, by forcing ourselves to look in this mirror, isn't just showing us the places that our self cherishing mind is leading us astray. What it does is it asks us, how do you feel about that? When you realize you are the source of all of your suffering, when you realize that your misery is coming not from outside of you, not from the external circumstances, but from your mind, from the self-cherishing mind that insists it has to be on top. When you realize that, what happens, right? What's your first instinct? For me, is a great example. So last Monday, so I was in Bangalore last weekend, right? And I go home on Sunday night, 9:30, 10 o'clock from the bus. And I had debate on Monday. And I only had debate in the evening, not in the morning. I had classes and other things in the morning. And I think a puja as well. But I had debate in the evening. And in debate, the way our evening debate is structured is for 45 minutes or so, we have one-on-one debate with a classmate. And then for another hour, we have a group debate where two people will sit down as the people that are answering. And then at first, one person will be debating against them, but eventually more people stand up until you have maybe a half dozen people that are all debating simultaneously against the two people that are answering. And it was my turn to be the answerer, right? We call it sitting damja. So it was my turn to sit damja. And usually the way it happens is one person, it's their job to be the answerer, the damjua, and another person will come and help them. But Monday nights are like, for here at the monastery, Monday nights are like your Friday nights, okay? For those of you that work a Monday to Friday job, everyone's mind is on the weekend because Tuesday is our day off from the monastery. So all the monks' minds are on Tuesday. So most of the monks aren't particularly interested in being there on Monday nights. Do you know what I mean? Like they're checked out a little bit. Because we've been debating 6 days a week nonstop, and so it's our very last debate until it's time to get a little bit of a break. And so no one wanted to sit down with me, so I was by myself, and I got really frustrated because I said, "What? Everyone's just being lazy. They didn't want to have to sit there and answer and help me out." And I said, "What if the disciplinarian comes? If the disciplinarian comes, every other group has two people answering, but we only have one. Why is no one coming to help me? And everyone just kind of like was being very shameful and like looking down and not answering because they just didn't want to do it, right? They'd rather debate you because if you're standing and debating, it's more fun. You don't really have to you don't have to have any conviction, right? When you're debating, you get to make up whatever you want. Answering is more difficult. And everyone was just kind of lazy and checked out. And to be honest, if it wasn't my turn, I wouldn't have wanted to do it either. But it was my turn. We have a rotation. So I got really frustrated. I got really, really frustrated with my classmates. And finally, the monk who was debating against me, other people joined him, and he came and he sat and he helped me out. Okay. And I go, I did not, I mean, I did my job. I answered, I did everything I was supposed to do. And then after we went to prayers, we had 45 minutes worth of prayers, and then we have a little more one on one debate. And then the evening's finally over. And he debated with me again after prayers. And I was, a little surly, okay? If I'm being honest, I was a little surly. And afterwards, I called him and I said, I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry if I seemed impatient. I wasn't upset with you, but I was just frustrated that no one was helping me. And it was not an appropriate way for me to behave, especially not towards you because you were the one who was kindest to me. So I apologized to him. And he said, oh, our class really needs to up their game. It's not your fault, blah, blah, blah. He was being very kind. But I realized it was all my self-cherishing mind, right? Yes, it's true that my classmates should have came and helped me out, and they were all being lazy. That's true. But also I was being lazy, and I wanted them to come because that would make my job easier, right? And the only reason I got so upset is because I expected that other people should come and help me, that they shouldn't leave me alone, that I deserved it, right? So it was my self-cherishing mind that was frustrated with the way my classmates were behaving. And it was my self-cherishing mind that said, how dare you treat me like this? And then it was my self-cherishing mind that continued that mindset and made me miserable for the next hour or so when we went and recited prayers. And it wasn't until I looked at that and I said, wow, you are not practicing at all what you preach. You are letting your self-cherishing mind lead you into suffering, right? Because whether or not you have assistance, whether or not your classmates come and step up and help you or not, that doesn't mean you're suffering. Your suffering comes from this attitude you have. And when I realized that, my first instinct was, no, it's their fault. That's always our first instinct, right? You don't want to look in the mirror and see all the things you've done wrong. But then once I realized it, I said, no, 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 no. What am I doing? I'm creating more misery for myself. And I luckily had the insight because of my practice, because every day I try to analyze my self-cherishing mind, see how it's operating, right? I'm not saying I'm some expert. I'm not saying I'm a great practitioner, but I do the work to some extent. So I was able to see, no, 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 no. You're not benefiting anyone. You're not benefiting your classmates, and you're definitely not benefiting yourself. That's why I called my classmate to apologize, because I realized that what I needed to do is say, this is my fault. And even when he tried to placate me and say, no, 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 our classmates were being jerks, I said, it doesn't matter, right? And what's one of the most important things from mind training? You can identify 1,000 of flaws from other people, and it's no benefit to you, but identify one of your own flaws, and that's infinitely more beneficial, right? It doesn't matter if my classmates were behaving appropriately or inappropriately. I was the one creating my own suffering. And luckily, I've done enough work that when I realized that, instead of fighting against it, I leaned into it, I recognized it, and I was able to adjust my attitude, not immediately, but pretty close to immediately, right? Pretty close to immediately. That's what we have to be doing. We have to be looking at our minds, especially when we're disturbed, especially when we feel like we've been violated, we've been criticized, we've been insulted, something's been taken from us. Especially when we feel those mind of frustration or jealousy or anger or attachment or any of these minds. The minds that say, I am important. When we feel those, we have to look at them and say, where is this coming from? Is this coming truly from outside or is it coming from inside? And we might be able to identify all of the external causes. That's true. I could identify very easily all of the external circumstances that allowed that mind to arise. But ultimately, that mind came from me, right? It didn't come from any of those causes. Those were just the conditions that precipitated that mind. If I had done the more work, that mind wouldn't have come in the first place. Okay? So we have to be doing all the time, especially when it's difficult. So I encourage you, I really do. I know that it's easy to study this text and it can be very motivational, but then throughout the week, you don't think about it. It's very easy to be that way because our lives are busy. We're trying to do many different things. I really encourage you to take the time throughout your week and on your day to day, try to meditate on this text. Try to become familiar with what the self-cherishing mind feels like, right? And one of the ways you do that is by analyzing your day. Right? So if you're not able to recognize the self-cherishing mind when it arises, at least in the evening, just go through your day and say, what did I do today? How did I react to other people? How did I react to my environment? How did I react when things went well? How did I react when things went poorly? and look and try to analyze what you did throughout the day. And so you're not catching the self-cherishing mind as it arises, but at least you're becoming familiar with it and you can identify it. And then as you do that, as you begin to be able to identify it in that way, then you get to identify it more quickly. If you know that the self-cherishing mind in me in this circumstance often arises as me feeling such and such a way, then when that emotion arises, you notice it right away. And then when you notice it, you can do something about it. Because the truth is, no matter how gratifying the self-cherishing mind may feel at the moment, it is never bringing you benefit. Never. Okay? It's never benefiting you. That pride, that ego, that sense of satisfaction, when you have the perfect insult to cut someone down after they've insulted you, the perfect comeback, that's not benefiting you. Seeking out your own gain, seeking out praise, seeking out compliments, trying to avoid, to do something just to avoid discomfort, that's never benefiting you. It might feel like benefit in the short term, in the immediate term, but it's never actual benefit. Okay? And we're so accustomed just from our daily habits to think that that short-term benefit is real happiness, that short-term avoidance of suffering is real happiness, it's real joy, that we continually seek it out. And as long as we continually seek it out, what we're doing is planting the seeds for more suffering for ourselves. We're creating these bad habits that are grabbing onto suffering in both hands and telling ourselves it's happiness. And that's not going to bring us benefit. We're celebrating all of the perfections of samsara, okay? Which is not a thing to celebrate. So I really encourage you. The first step, right, in your daily meditation, try in the evening just to analyze your day and to see how many of my actions are motivated by Dharma, how many actions are motivated by a self-cherishing mind. Just try to add them up. And then throughout your day, try to recognize what is motivating this right now. Am I being motivated because I want my own benefit, or am I being motivated to help others? Am I being motivated to prevent my own loss or my own fear or my own discomfort, or because I want to be of service to others and benefit others? Just try to see throughout the day. And when you notice that mind, how does it feel to notice that mind? Do you instinctively bristle against that feeling? Or do you recognize it and rejoice that you've noticed something and you have the opportunity to correct it, right? That's what we need to do. But that takes time. It takes effort. You have to have a relaxed approach that realizes it's not going to happen overnight. So it's not easy, right? It's not easy to do. It's easy to talk about. It's easy to look at all the pieces, but to actually apply them into your life takes effort, right? Which is why we study. We study to get an intellectual understanding. And as we get an intellectual understanding, then we bring it into our meditation practice to develop conviction, right? If you read this and you say, oh, this makes sense, but I don't know if I believe it, well, then you're never going to apply it to your life. If you don't have confidence that the teachings of the Buddha are accurate and the teachings on mind training are an actual way to transform your life, to transform all of your suffering into happiness, if you don't have conviction in that, you're never going to apply the teachings, right? And you're not going to get conviction just by listening to me talk about it. You get conviction by studying and by thinking about it and by doing the work of contemplation. And now, if you have a guru that you rely on and you have faith in them, then you can have some conviction that this guru who you have observed, you don't have blind faith in them, but you've observed them and you have come to rely on their advice, then you can have some conviction from what they say. That's fine. But in general, your real conviction has to have a foundation of your own contemplative experience, right? Otherwise, it's like building the first and second floor of a building without building the foundation first. It might look pretty, but it's not going to be stable. It can just fall down, right? So you have to have conviction in the teachings. So you develop an intellectual understanding, which is what we're doing together today. And then you develop conviction by contemplating the teachings. And then once you have a small amount of conviction, then you do the work of meditating on those teachings to try to make them inseparable from your mind, so that when you have the self-cherishing mind arise, you can recognize it. And when you have the antidote to the self-cherishing mind arise, you also recognize that and you can rejoice in it. But you fill your quiver with all these metaphorical arrows, so you know how to defeat any of the afflictions when they arise, right? That's all going to come from meditating on these topics, by making yourself familiar with the Dharma, with the teachings that you have previously developed conviction in. So it takes all of these steps. And we're doing all of them all the time. It's not like you finish study and then you're done. You don't have to study anymore. Then you move on to contemplation. And then you finish that and you move on to meditation. It's not like that, okay? You have to do all of them all the time because they work together. The more you meditate, then you might read the same text and you find new meaning in it because you have a different level of understanding and appreciation. And then the deeper meaning you have, you are able to develop a stronger conviction. And then that lets your meditation go deeper. And it cycles, right? So they all work together. The Dharma practice, we talk about the path to Buddhahood and the Lam Rim path, right? The graduated path. But it's really a holistic practice that we're trying to do all of it at once because all the pieces work together. Now, Atisha and Tsongkhapa taught us this Lamrim method because it is a convenient way for us to see how all of the different pieces work together, right? But that doesn't mean we have to complete one part of it before we move on to the next. So it's the same with mind training, okay? And it's the same with any of our practice. We have to engage in this process. Mind training, I think, especially, is really easy to be motivated by, but it's hard to practice because it demands a lot from us. Okay. But the reason it demands so much is because we have been luxuriating in the miseries of samsara for so long that to do anything that is aligning ourselves purely with Dharma and to turn our back on the self cherishing mind feels like a lot of work because it is a lot of work because we're not used to it, because we're used to seeking out worldly ends. And mind training doesn't give us any wiggle room. Okay. So that's why it is so effective because it's not just pruning, it's not just pruning the tree, it's digging up the roots. Okay. So it's okay to feel overwhelmed sometimes. When you feel overwhelmed, you take a step back and you say, okay, this feeling of being overwhelmed is too much for me right now. How can I still engage in the same practice in a meaningful way that doesn't bring about this overwhelming experience? How can I continue moving forward without feeling like it's going to burn me out? And then gradually, your practice increases and gets deeper in that way. Now, the other thing to think about before we jump into this text is that the other type of meditation, so this meditation I'm talking about, trying to identify where your self-cherishing mind is active and seeing how it is influencing your life, and then trying to practice the antidotes to the self-cherishing mind. There are many different antidotes. Ultimately, we say compassion and bodhicitta are one of the best antidotes because bodhicitta, the wish to become a Buddha to benefit other sentient beings, removes yourself from the center of the story, right? It focuses all of your energy on serving others, and therefore you can't be focused on yourself anymore. So that, in many ways, is one of the best antidotes. But depending on what manifestation the self-cherishing mind is taking in your life, there are different antidotes you can apply, right? In the moment. So meditating in that way is one thing that's important. But the other meditation that comes from the mind training tradition is what we call Tonglen. And we mentioned this in the beginning of this text. And it's going to come up again closer to the end. We might get there today, we may not. And Tonglen is the practice of visualizing that you take all of the other sufferings of sentient beings onto yourself. You willingly accept the suffering of others, the mental suffering and the physical suffering, and you visualize that suffering leaving their body and entering into your body. And in that visualization, you visualize that suffering beating down your self-cherishing mind, destroying it completely. And then in exchange for the suffering you've taken from others, you give them all of your happiness. You give them all of your pleasure, all of your delight. You give it all away. Okay? And you visualize that leaving your body and being absorbed into other sentient beings' bodies and bringing them delight. Now, the beauty of this practice is that it makes it easier for us to practice the antidotes. When you do Tonglen practice on your own, what you're doing is creating the habit that your mind is not focused on your own immediate pleasure and instead is willing to experience discomfort for the benefit of others. And now in your meditation practice, you're not actually taking on someone's suffering, right? You're not actually giving away your happiness because we can't give away our experiences like that. But what you're doing is you're creating the mental habit that makes it easy to do that. So then when you notice your self-cherishing mind happening, practicing the antidote, whatever it may be, is easier because you've already habituated yourself to the experience of not being attached to your own happiness, instead being attached to others' happiness as more important than your own. Tonglen, giving and taking, it habituates your mind to that attitude. And so then when it's time to practice the antidotes, they're much easier to practice. There's not as much resistance. So doing both these meditations, a meditation that is actively recognizing how the self-cherishing mind is infiltrating your life and is leading you astray, and practicing Tonglen, they're both useful because one is looking at the source of the problem and one is preparing the way for the solution, right? Tonglen is preparing the way for you to practice the antidotes much more easily. And the identifying the self-cherishing mind is showing you where to apply those antidotes. So these two meditation practices work hand in hand, okay? They help each other. So with that, why don't we jump into the text? Now, I think everyone here is familiar with this text by Acharya Dhammarakshita, who was one of Atisha's three teachers in India, or three teachers of bodhicitta. Um, Atisha had over 150 gurus, and he had perfect guru devotion for all of them. Most of us aren't able to do that. But of those 150 gurus, three of them taught him bodhicitta. And the most famous one is called Serlingpa, and it was on the island of Sumatra, and he spent, I think, 12 years there. But there are two in India. One is Maitri Yogi, and one is Dharmarakshita. And this text is from Dhammarakshita, who taught this text directly to Atisha, and then Atisha brought it to Tibet, and he taught it to Dramtompa, his chief disciple, who was a layperson, I should add, right? He wasn't a monk. And he and Dramtompa translated it into Tibetan. So that's the version of it we have. Now, the text, as we know, is called the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. We haven't really had that imagery in this part of the text. In the first half of the text, that imagery of a wheel is talking about, it's using the imagery of our own karma, right? So the negative actions we have done that have been motivated by self-cherishing plant seeds that are then ripened as experiences of suffering. And so that is the wheel of sharp weapons that has come back to harm us. We have thrown that wheel out there by engaging in non-virtuous activities that were motivated by self-cherishing. And now that wheel has come back and is causing us the experience of suffering. Right. So in the first part of the text is when we really have this heavy imagery of this wheel of sharp weapons, that our actions are going to come back, that all of our experiences of suffering aren't due to the vagaries of the world. They aren't random. They aren't punishment. They're the natural consequence of negative actions we've done in the past that are now ripening. That doesn't mean we've done them in this life, but we've done them in some life, right? In a past life. And by recognizing that, what that helps us do is A, it pinpoints what we need to do to overcome the immediate experience of suffering, but B, it helps encourage us to not engage in those non-virtuous activities, and so that we can prevent the suffering from being experienced in the future, right? So the first part of the text is all about looking at different experiences of suffering, seeing what may be the negative actions that were the cause of those types of suffering, or the cause of the negative karma that ripened as that type of suffering. And then what are the antidotes? What to do in place of those negative actions. And now the section of the text we're in now is, now that we've finished that, we are making appeals to Yamantaka, right? So Yamantaka is a ferocious Buddha of wisdom. So we think of Manjushri as the Buddha of wisdom, right? And the wrathful aspect of Manjushri is Yamantaka. So whenever you see him, he has a buffalo head, and he is surrounded by flames, and all his hands have different weapons. So he's very, very fierce, very fearful, and fierce. But he's a fierce type of wisdom, right? And so this next section is making an appeal to Yamantaka and saying, these are all of the actions that I say that I'm doing, but instead my self-cherishing mind has me doing the opposite. So all these verses are pointing out the ways that we're being hypocritical, that we are letting our self-cherishing mind guide our life. And it's requesting Yamantaka to please destroy the self-cherishing mind, to destroy the ego, to destroy my tendency to sabotage myself over and over and over again. And the reason we're making appeals to Yamantaka is because our ego is so strong, so deeply embedded. We've been doing these bad habits for so long that just politely asking them to stop isn't going to work. We need to do the work, right? We need to be fierce about destroying our self-cherishing mind. And so we need to have this wrathful aspect of wisdom to help us. Okay. And so at this point, we have made it to verse 79. And now, every week, I kind of discuss the translation situation, because this translation, I've looked at 4 different English translations of this text, and they're all different, because the text itself is dealing with an old type of Tibetan that can be hard to understand. And the lines are very short, they're very pithy, And so they're open to a lot of interpretation. Um, this particular translation that we have, that we're using, was done in the 70s, I believe, and it was done along with Geshe-no Darge, who gave a commentary on it. So this translation is matching up with his commentary. I encourage you to read other translations, and you might learn something different. Even though I think all the ones that I've read are accurate. I don't think they're not accurate, but they have different language. And the kind of most wild part of this translation is this second half of every verse that says, trample him, dance on the head of this treacherous concept of selfish concern, tear out the heart of this self centered butcher who slaughters our chance to gain final release. So, this is the appeal to Yamantaka. So, the first part of every verse is recognizing one way the self cherishing mind is acting in our life. And then the second part of every verse is saying, help me get rid of the self cherishing mind. Help me get rid of this ego, this grasping at the self, right? There's a difference, as we talked about, between self cherishing and self grasping. Self grasping is the root of samsara. Self grasping is the belief that this I that I perceive exists the way I perceive it, that that it's permanent, it's unchanging, and it's substantially existent, that it truly exists. That's what it means to grasp at the self of persons, especially. And self cherishing is the idea that my happiness is more important than every other being's happiness. So the real root of samsara is self grasping. That's what's causing us to cycle in samsara again and again. That is the fundamental ignorance that is causing us to develop all of the other afflicted minds. So the real antidote to uproot that is understanding emptiness, the wisdom that realizes the nature of reality. But very shortly after self grasping, we have self cherishing. And self cherishing is what we say causes all of our suffering. You know, some of the examples say that self grasping is like the boss and self cherishing is like the messenger. So you can think of it like this. Ideally, our work should be to uproot self grasping. And we should always be trying to cultivate a realization of emptiness, a realization of the nature of reality, because that helps us uproot self grasping. And if we uproot self grasping, then all of our other afflictions lessen, they're weakened. And if we actually uproot self grasping, then we eliminate all the other afflictions because they all come from self grasping. The truth is, that's very difficult, right? It's easy to talk about emptiness, but it's difficult to really realize it. And self cherishing is something we can see in our everyday life quite easily. And we can also develop a very easy worldly recognition how our self cherishing mind causes suffering, almost immediate suffering in our experience, right? Like my experience last week at debate, I could see very clearly how me being frustrated with my classmates was making me unhappy. And that my frustration, my unhappiness, my misery wasn't coming from them. It was coming from me expecting something, then expecting to be treated a certain way, right? I could see that very easily. It doesn't take a lot of philosophical understanding to see how the self cherishing mind causes harm immediately. You don't have to worry about this is going to cause harm in a future life like this. No, it causes harm right away. And so, because of that, destroying the self cherishing mind is also critically important. And so, that all of these texts are focusing on that as the primary goal, with the recognition that destroying self grasping is also a kind of secondary goal. And so, the second half of the reverse here is talking about destroying the ego, the self grasping, which is the butcher that destroys our chance for happiness, but it is itself the cause of our self cherishing. Okay. So I'm not going to give commentary on that second half of the verse every time, simply because it's the same for all of these verses that we're studying right now. But it's always recognizing that whatever the first half of the verse is referencing, it is because of our self grasping and our self cherishing. So every verse, it's repeated that way to remind us of how powerful the self cherishing mind is and how destructive it is. And when you're reciting this text, you fall into a rhythm of reciting the same lines over and over and over again with every verse. And by doing that, it makes them feel more real to you, right? You understand them more clearly. Since we're not reciting this together now, we're just simply studying it. I'm not going to give commentary on it every time, but it's important. If you are studying this text on your own, if you're practicing this text, if you're reciting this text, you should be reciting these lines over and over again, because there's something about the recitation of them that makes them, you feel them in your body in a more meaningful way. And the other thing I recommend is that changing all of these plurals to singular. Okay. In the original, it doesn't have any plural markers, and so this is written to kind of express. This translation is expressing like a royal we, so we can talk about all of us at once. But for me, It's much more powerful to think of it as just me, right? So with that, I'm going to go through these verses, and I think we can get through a lot of them today because these verses are pretty self-explanatory. Now, at the end of this section, we're going to have a section that's making appeals to Yamantaka more directly. And that's maybe 10 verses or so. I'm not quite sure the number, but not many. And then there is a brief section at the end about emptiness. And that wraps up this whole text. Okay. So we'll see how far we get today. But these verses are pretty clear, showing different ways self-cherishing infiltrates our everyday life. And we lie to ourselves to say that what I'm doing is really beneficial, but really I'm being motivated by worldly means. And so these verses help see different experiences of that in our life. So if we start with 79, my jealousy is strong, and whatever is said, I am always the skeptic. I doubt what is meant. I am fussy, I am bad tempered, and I am hard to get on with, inflicting obnoxious behavior on others. This, I mean, this is very clear, right? You know, Buddhism encourages skepticism. That's one of the reasons the Dalai Lama says that Westerners and people that have Western educations are really they're prime students to study Buddhism because we're supposed to be skeptical, but we're not supposed to be cynical. We're not supposed to believe that I have all the answers, right? So here, this is saying I'm always a skeptic. But what this really means is that whenever anyone says anything, instead of believing them, I think my opinion is more important. That's the reason I'm doubting them. Not because I want to be investigative and not because I want to eschew blind faith, but because I think I know the answer correctly. And anyone that says something that I don't already agree with, that can't be correct, right? How often do we feel that way? When someone says something that just slightly deviates from our worldview, our first instinct is to protect, no, 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 that can't be right, because that's not what I believe. I mean, look at the problems in politics right now. That's one of the biggest problems. And it's one of the biggest problems, just in a worldly sense, of trying to convince someone of facts that you have, because once someone believes something, it's very hard to get them to not believe that thing anymore. Okay. That's true for everything. That's true for us and it's true for others. So it's not something that we just put on the other political party. Everyone is like that. When you have a belief about something, it's very hard to give up that belief, even when you're presented with facts, even when you're presented with clear information that goes against what you believe. That is the worldly way of existing because we define ourselves by the beliefs we hold. And if this belief that I hold isn't correct, what does that say about me? That means I was fooled. That means that I don't understand something, right? That makes me feel bad about myself. We're all like that, okay? And it's about politics and about other things as well, about Dharma, about anything. When we have a belief, when that belief is challenged, our instinct is to protect that belief, not actually investigate. So this is what this is saying. I'm jealous, right? Because whenever anyone looks like they are getting recognition that I want, then my first instinct, instead of celebrating them, is to be jealous of them. And when they might say something that disagrees with what I already believe, instead of investigating my belief, investigating their claim, my first instinct is to say, nope, can't be correct because I don't believe it. And because of that, I'm fussy, I'm bad tempered, and I am obnoxious. That's the truth. How many people do you know who have to be right about everything? They have to get the last word in every conversation. I'm sure we've all met people like that. Hopefully, we're not that person anymore. I know I was when I was in high school. Hopefully, I'm not that person anymore. Hopefully, in your friend group, you're not that person, but you know that person. You've met that person, either in your friend group or at your work group, and you know that you don't like spending time with them, right? Because they're annoying. Because no matter what you say, they have to have the last word. They have to show you just how much they know about something, whether they really know it or not. They're not sharing information because they want to help you. They're sharing it because they want you to know how smart they are. So don't be that person. Okay? That's what this is reminding us. It's so easy to be that person. That's our instinct. Don't be that person. Being that person does nothing but create suffering for yourself and suffering for others. When someone requests me to do something for them, I am never obliging, but think up instead clever, devious methods to do him some harm. When others concede and agree with my viewpoint, I do not acquiesce, but I argue still more. Right? So then this is the flip side of that. When someone agrees with me, I'm already in a mode where I need to argue. So I can't just be graceful in my win. I have to push, right? I always have to be not just right, but I have to defeat the other person. And when someone goes out of their way to help me, or they request me to help them rather, instead of going out of my way to help them, especially if it's going to be at some discomfort to myself. Instead, I spend my time thinking, what can I do instead of helping this person? You know, and to some extent, we kind of we celebrate this. We say, oh, this is this being clever. I often think of the story of Tom Sawyer, right? Very, very famous American story by Mark Twain. And the most famous part is, so Tom Sawyer is like a 12-year-old kid. This is in the 1800s. And his chore is to go whitewash a fence, to paint the fence white in front of his house. And he pretends that it's the best thing ever. And he shows off how much fun it is. And he convinces all the other kids that come by that this is the most fun thing to do. So he ends up not doing any work and just relaxing. And he's able to convince everyone else to do his job for him because he pretends that this is the most fun way to live your life, right? So instead of doing the work himself, he spends his time scheming and trying to develop a scheme or a way to make others do the job for him. Whereas if he had just put that effort into doing the job, he could have done it himself. We do this all the time and we celebrate it. We say that was very clever of you, getting someone else to do your work for you. You were just delegating your work, right? All it is really being lazy. Okay. Now, of course, I'm not saying don't delegate work, especially in your professional life. You have to delegate sometimes. You can't do everything yourself. And being a good worker and being good at life is knowing what things you can do well and what things other people can do well. So if someone asks you to help them and it's something that you aren't capable of doing, then you shouldn't, you should be polite and say, I'm sorry, that's not something I'm capable of doing. Like, I won't be of any help to you. So it's not saying you have to always, put yourself into dangerous or difficult situations to help others, but it's saying be honest with yourself. If someone asks me to do something and I say I can't do it, is it because I really can't do it or because I'm being lazy? Because I just don't want to do it, right? I can't do something and don't want to do something are two wildly different things.
Venerable,
Yes.
venerable. So,
Yeah.
from a Dharma point of view,
Mm.
one should look at Tom Sawyer as someone who is lazy, of course. He admits he is lazy, but as someone who is like not just as an enjoyable and pretty witty and fun book, but as see the character as being self-cherishing and stuff like. Is that what one should
I
do?
think
Because
I
I
think
did
definitely.
enjoy the book a lot, I remember.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, but the truth is, I just recently reread part of of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn for a different project I'm working on with a friend. So it's in my mind. Um, Mark Twain himself is showing that Tom's actions have consequences, right? So yes, you're supposed to see this young character as like a young rapscallion who is clever and he's witty, but he's also cultivating negative character traits. So being lazy isn't something that's celebrated. And even though he's able to get away with it in this time, in that moment of whitewashing the fence and so on, it doesn't set him up for long-term success because it shows him that it's better to be devious and be a trickster than it is to do hard work and to be honest, right? So even the book itself is not positioning this as a good skill. It's just showing him as a young, I think the term would be like a rapscallion if we're thinking 19th century English language. So yes, when we read, when you are engaging in pop culture, you can enjoy a book like that, and at the same time using a Dharma understanding to say, well, just because this is successful in this book, that is not actually a useful way to go about your life. And you can look at those actions and say what he's doing is setting himself up for long-term suffering, because he is being manipulative, he is lying, he's seeking out only his own pleasure, and he's not looking to benefit others in any meaningful way, right? So that doesn't mean you don't enjoy the book. It just means that you use a Dharma understanding to engage in that pop culture and to see a different meaning that maybe wasn't intended by the author. Though I think in this case, Mark Twain is trying to show how Tom Sawyer is clever, but he uses his wit and his cleverness in the wrong way, right? And so it's encouraging you to instead use your intellect for the right way, for a good purpose, and not for a harmful purpose.
Yes,
But if we want to
thank
live, yeah, I mean, I always recommend people engage with pop culture. I don't think being a Buddhist means you have to turn off the TV and turn off music and turn off books. I think that we live in the world, and pop culture is a really wonderful way to be part of the world. And we can use our Dharma mind, our Dharma understanding, to engage with that pop culture, to bring new understanding to it, to bring us something to meditate on in our life, to help change our mind in some way. So I think that's, the one reason I use examples like that, but that's a perfect question. That even if the book celebrates that character trait, that isn't something we should celebrate. And it's through studying self-cherishing and through studying mind training, especially, that you can identify it in another character. And once you can identify it in them, it makes it easier to identify it in yourself as well.
Yes, thank you.
So moving on to verse 81. I do not pay attention to what others tell me. I am a trial to be with. I strain others' nerves. My feelings are hurt at the slightest remark, and I hold grudges strongly. I never forgive. I definitely have people in my life from a decade or 2 decades ago who would agree with those first two lines about me. I strain others' nerves. My mother would be very happy to tell you I got on her last nerve as a child. Okay. And, as a child, that's understandable, but we're adults. And we have to realize that the way we live in the world matters. And we should always be focused on trying to make others' lives better. And of course, the goal is to free them from all suffering, right? So we want to bring them not worldly happiness alone, but spiritual happiness. But that also means bringing them about worldly happiness to the best of our ability, given our resources and what is available to us. So going about our day in such a way that makes the lives of those around us more difficult, right? That gets on others' nerves, that is frustrating. How is that benefiting them? Never mind what it's doing to our mind. Never mind that we're encouraging ourselves to behave in these unhealthy ways. How is that helping others, right? So, and then the hypocrisy is we spend our time, with this air of superiority, getting on others' nerves. And when someone gives us the slightest remark, the slightest criticism, we take it so personally that it wounds us so deeply, right? And that's because our self-cherishing mind seeks only praise and wants to avoid all criticism. It wants to avoid all infamy. It only wants popularity. And so at the slightest, smallest remark, we latch onto it and we define ourselves and our relationship with those people by this small criticism. We can give it, but we can't ever receive it, right? And that doesn't benefit them. It doesn't benefit us. And holding grudges, one of our bodhisattva vows is to never hold a grudge, especially out of anger. And so holding a grudge out of anger is one of the root bodhisattva vows, or to not hold a grudge out of anger, especially when not especially, but even if someone else apologizes, to not let go of a grudge out of anger. So, our habit is to hold these grudges. How many people do you know? It seems that like that bitterness of being angry at someone, like people hold on to it and they just become these shells of people. How many people do you know who, no matter what you say to them, their answer is some sort of criticism, that they're such misanthropes that nothing ever pleases them and their lives are so miserable. We all do that to some extent. And so this is saying you can look at those extreme examples and realize it's not going to bring you happiness, not in this life and not in future lives. So we have to let it go. Holding on to a grudge doesn't help you, and it doesn't help the other person. It doesn't help anyone. Now, if someone harms you again and again, that's not saying put yourself in harm over and over, right? It's not saying that you should just leave yourself wide open to experience either emotional or physical harm. Protect yourself as necessary, but you shouldn't have emotional attachment to that, right? So taking yourself out of a difficult situation and allowing yourself a sense of safety is important. But regardless of that, your mind shouldn't hold on to that person causing you harm, gripping them tightly as an enemy. Instead, you look at them as someone who is suffering, and out of their suffering, they're causing you harm. That they are trying to bring about their own happiness, but they don't understand the distinction between happiness and suffering. And so they think that by harming you is going to bring them happiness. And so therefore, all they're doing is causing more suffering for themselves in this life and in future lives. But they don't realize that. So instead, in response to their harm, you should develop compassion for them. And instead of holding a grudge, you should realize that all they're doing is planting the seeds of further suffering. That doesn't mean don't pull yourself out of that situation if you have to, especially if there is like emotional or physical violence and you have a way to protect yourself from that. Definitely remove yourself from that situation. But removing yourself from a situation isn't the same thing as holding a grudge and saying that is a bad person who deserves everything they get. You can hold that person who is harming you with a mind of compassion and still go about preserving your own safety at the same time. Because more important than your physical safety is your emotional safety. And that is something you have 100% control over, regardless of what other people are doing to you. So grudges are not going to benefit you. They're not going to show you how to they're not going to show you how to lead a meaningful life, and they're not going to prevent the other person from continuing to cause harm, right? And that's grudges that are based in an accurate assessment of reality. A lot of time, our grudges are based on things that aren't even true. Like someone might say some small thing, and then I blow it out of proportion. And instead of responding to what they actually said, I develop a grudge based on my interpretation of what they said, which is only existing in my head. It's not even what they said, right? So a lot of time, our grudges aren't even based in reality. They're based in these, hyperbolic versions of reality that we've created for ourselves due to our self-cherishing mind and how protective we are of our self-cherishing mind. I am always jealous of those of great status. I feel holy gurus are a threat to avoid. I'm overwhelmed by attachment and I'm ruled by my passions. I spend all my time lusting after young loves. This is pretty self-explanatory, right? When you are worried, when you want to feel like you're the most important person in the room, then you avoid people who know more than you. You avoid people who could actually teach you something, who could be role models for you, because it makes you feel lesser. And so not only are you nurturing your self-cherishing mind, but you're depriving yourself of the opportunity to learn something, to improve yourself, because the people that could actually help you, you're avoiding, because they're the ones that are going to make you feel bad about yourself. Not because of anything they do, but because of your own self-cherishing mind. So you avoid people that you know are, are gurus or are well-learned or have the qualities that you're seeking that you don't quite have. And then the second part here is saying, overwhelmed by attachment, we seek out, we lust after young loves. This obviously can mean literally, our attachment always is seeking out new things to commodify, but it also can be metaphorically that we're never satisfied with what we have, right? So this can be sexual attachment, but it also can just be attachment to anything. That no matter the newest, shiniest thing we buy, it'll get us happy. It'll keep us happy for a very short period of time until we want something new, you know? Because as long as we're defining our happiness as something external to ourselves, we're never going to be satisfied. So we're always seeking out something new. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. And so we're always lusting after young loves. So this, you can take it literally, and it's meant literally, but it also is meant metaphorically, that we're always seeking out the new thing because we're never satisfied with what we have, because we're never going to be satisfied with external phenomena. Yet we keep telling ourselves we will be. Okay? Moving on to 83. I do not think of friendships as long-term commitments. I treat old companions with thoughtless neglect, and when I am making new friends with a stranger, I try to impress him with grandiose ways. Right? Obviously, as people who are trying to engage in a spiritual practice, it's easy to get into this mindset that says, since I'm giving up all worldly delights, that means I don't need friends. I don't need companions. And I'm just going to give all that up. And that is a misunderstanding. That is not a useful way to go about understanding our lives, because we live in the world and having community is really important. Now, of course, we do want to avoid friends who are constantly encouraging us to engage in non-virtuous behavior, right? We want to avoid what are so-called bad friends, but we need companions. Never mind the fact that we're social animals. Like, as a species, humans don't do well with isolation. Now, the more you tame your mind, I'm sure many of you have met great meditators or great teachers who can go sit in a cave and be by themselves forever and they're perfectly content. Most of us aren't there. If you tame your mind, then you can get there. You can find that peace and contentment in yourself. But that's a practice, that's a journey. And until you get there, having community is really helpful. Having community is how you hold yourself accountable, right? And how you are able to put into practice all the things that you're thinking about. So community, whether it's Dharma community or, worldly community, both really important to our emotional, our spiritual, and our psychological well-being. However, how often do we take our friendships for granted? Especially those old friendships, people that we trust that are always going to be there. We don't do the work to keep them, to nurture them, to keep them vibrant. And yet, when again, going very similar to the last verse, when a new person comes along, We want to show off for them. We want to win their attraction. We want them to want us. The people that we've had in our life for a long time, they just want us by default. We don't need to earn it anymore, so we forget about them. But when there's something new and shiny, the new, hot young thing, we want them to want us. So we show off in grandiose ways. We try to impress them. Why do we do that? Because we want popularity, because we want fame, because our self-cherishing mind says, everyone look at me. I need to have everyone praise me. I can't be criticized. I can't be infamous, right? So we have to look at our relationships with others. And it doesn't matter if it's a Dharma relationship or a worldly relationship. Those both are beneficial, or they can be beneficial to our lives, but we have to put in the work, right? Those people that we have as friends, we should see them as opportunities to practice selfless giving, to practice cherishing others more than ourselves. Our friends' happiness and well-being should be more important to us than our own happiness and well-being. That's what it means to be in community with someone, is that you care about the community more than you care about the individual, right? That's the kind of whole problem with our politics, is that everyone is so concerned about themselves that they're not wanting to help their neighbor. Okay? So I think community, friendship is really important. And if it's Dharma friendship, that's great because you already align with spiritual and moral values. But outside of Dharma world, you might have many friends, either from before you met the Dharma, or you might meet new people now. And it's perfectly fine to have friends that aren't Buddhists, that aren't practicing the same spiritual path as you. You can be friends with them, and they can be a meaningful part of your life, and you can be a meaningful part of their life. But you have to do the work that prioritizes their happiness more than your own. And we don't do that. At least most of us don't do that enough. Now, these next verses are especially talking about when we're sharing the Dharma with others. 84 says, I lack clairvoyance, and yet I lie, feigning powers. And then when I'm proved wrong, I must bear all those complaints. I have little compassion for those who are near me, and whenever they blunder, I'm quick to lash out. So again, this is just pretending to be something I'm not, and then when I get called on it, I make up an excuse, Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. That's the great and powerful Oz. Don't look at my faults. Just look at this thing that I'm showing you. How often do you do this? When you read these verses, I want you to, right now, we're just making sure that the meaning is clear. But then you should take this home with you. You should look at these verses after class is done and say, how often during my day do I do this? How often in my life am I focused on pretending that I am something I am not in order to impress others? And when I get called out on it, how do I react? Am I humble, or do I react with extra aggression? And then the flip side of that is, when someone else makes a mistake, am I able to be graceful with their mistake, or do I call them out? Do I attack them? Right? Most often you see some of the biggest bullies, they attack the weakest people in the group because they know they can attack them and overpower them. And they're so afraid of themselves being attacked that they never go after people that are confident or strong. They go after the weakest, generally speaking, right? Because their ego is so fragile that they always have to feel like they're the strongest. So they go after people they know they can dominate. And so we do that all the time to lesser degrees. So we have to avoid doing that, right? I have to actively develop compassion for all of those around me, even those who are not necessarily in a healthy relationship with me. Those who may be antagonistic towards me, I still have to have compassion for them. I have to wish for them to be free from suffering. I have poor education, I have limited knowledge, and whenever I speak, I am unsure of myself. My learning in scriptural texts is so meager that whenever I hear new teachings, I doubt they are true. Right? This is especially for those of us who are sharing the Dharma. It's easy to be overwhelmed by how exhaustive the teachings are. And since it's a lifelong practice of many lifetimes to study them, that it's very easy to feel like I don't know anything. I am, I'm useless in that way. And because of that, whenever I speak about things, I don't have any confidence. And instead of being honest about that, what I do is I just say, if I don't already understand it, it can't be true. I just shut myself off to things I don't understand. Okay. So we we have to recognize both these things, that the Dharma is exhaustive, that there are a lot of things to learn, that we have been cultivating bad habits since beginningless lifetimes. So we need to unlearn those things, right? It's not saying the Dharma is an easy fix, but it is also saying being humble and being honest about what I know and what I don't know, and trying to apply what I do know to the best of my ability is how I make progress. It's how I increase my understanding. As I said before, by practicing study, contemplation, and meditation, that is how I increase my understanding, not by pretending to know things and not by dismissing things that are too difficult or things that challenge what I already think. So we always have to be investigating what we know, what we understand, and trying to add to it in a healthy and holistic way. By making a habit of anger and passion, I come to despise everyone that I meet. And by making a habit of jealous resentment, I ascribe the fruits to others, disclaiming their worth. So this first part is very clear, right? Since I'm so accustomed to anger and to attachment or passion that anything or anyone I meet that doesn't meet my immediate needs, then I don't want to have anything to do with them, right? And then the second part is what this is a little strange phrasing. I ascribe fruits to others. What that means is I exaggerate others' bad qualities, and then I speak poorly of them. So when things go wrong, I ascribe fruits to others. What that means is I deprecate others in front of other people. So if something goes wrong, I say, oh, it's his fault because he's a bad person because he did this. So I exaggerate their bad qualities. And then whenever anything goes wrong or poorly, I blame it on others, right? That's what it means to ascribe the fruit to others. Here, fruit being the result. So whenever things go wrong, instead of taking responsibility for it, I'm quick to point the blame at others, exaggerating their bad qualities while I exaggerate my own good qualities. Or I pretend to have good qualities that I don't really have. I do not follow the proper procedure of study. I say it is needless to read the vast texts. I feel there's no value in learning from a guru. I slight oral teachings, and I think that I know best. So this is very easy when there's so much we don't know, right? Especially, I come to the monastery and I have a 25-year course of study. It's very easy to say, like, you don't really need to study that long. This part isn't that important. I don't have to focus on that. Here are the things that are more important because maybe it's too difficult to study those things. So here it's just saying that every part of the teachings of the Buddha are important. Relying upon teachers and gurus is important. And when there are things that just because I don't think they're important, that doesn't mean they aren't important. So here it's talking about oral teachings, right? That can be referencing a few things. Here it is referencing such as receiving transmissions of texts, So when you go to a guru, you can receive a transmission where they will give you a transmission where they received this text from their teacher who received it from their teacher, and you can trace the lineage of this text being taught from teacher to disciple, all the way until you receive it, right? So many people say, well, that's not important. They're just giving me a transmission. It's giving me imprints, but it doesn't matter. Who cares? It's not important, right? Here it's saying, so what that means is you're just missing the parts of the Dharma that aren't convenient for you. That's what this is saying, okay? The things that don't fit into your pre-existing worldview, you dismiss them. You say those don't matter. What matters is the things that I think are important. So instead of doing things the right way, instead of following the advice of my teachers or following the advice of the Buddha, the system that's been around for over 2,500 years, instead of following that, I'm just going to do the things I want. I'm going to take the bits and pieces that make sense to me right now, to my worldly mind, and I'm going to exploit those. And we see this a lot in conventional self-help, right? Which is why I'm always hesitant to kind of support any contemporary self-help, especially whether it is Buddhist flavored or not, because in my experience, there are a lot of people who take the bits and pieces that they understand, that they think are meaningful, and put them together and ignore the parts they don't like. And that, it may give you some small benefit, but it's not giving you the big picture. And so I always worry about those kind of things, right? Anyone that says that they have the perfect answer for you and you can learn it in 5 easy classes or 5 easy payments of $50, I'm doubtful of that, right? And my experience with it has not been great. Which means then when you look at the Dharma and you say, okay, there's a lot here I don't understand right away, but I appreciate that this all fits together and that the more I study, the more I contemplate, the more I practice, all these different pieces come into understanding and they start fitting together. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it is a process. It's one I'm committed to. It's one that I'm committing my life to because I realize that it's going to benefit me in this life and in all future lives. That's why it's okay not to understand everything right away, because I see how even the small understanding is helpful, and therefore that encourages me to slowly increase my understanding, right? I fail to understand, or excuse me, I fail to explain what the three baskets teach, but instead I dwell on theories that I have made up myself. I lack deep conviction and faith in the teachings, and whatever I say leaves the disciples confused. I hope this isn't me, but you never know. So the three baskets, right? We can say all of the teachings of the Buddha fall into these three categories of monastic discipline or Vinaya, or ethical discipline, we could say, sutra, and then Abhidharma, so cosmology, very broadly speaking. And so all of the teachings of the Buddha fall into those three categories. So here it's just saying that by failing to explain the three baskets or the Tripitaka, it's saying that I'm not actually teaching the teachings of the Buddha, but instead I'm just making up things, right? I've heard some teachers criticize, and their version of their criticism of this saying, you spend all your time telling stories. Not criticism of me, just in general. They say that when you don't understand the Dharma, you spend all your time telling stories and not actually teaching Dharma. And so I reflect that criticism very deeply, because I do tell a lot of stories, but hopefully I tell those stories to help make things more accessible to people, right? I don't ever try to tell stories to cover up for something I don't understand. When there's something I don't understand, if we come to that, I very will quickly admit I don't understand this completely. Um, so but it is also easy, right, to put on a big show and to tell a big story to circumvent the fact that you don't know what you're talking about. How often have you been to a presentation where someone speaks for a half hour, and then at the end of the presentation, after all the bells and whistles, you're like, wait, what did they actually talk about? Like they didn't really know anything. They just know, like, it's very easy to use stories, to use good showmanship to hide the fact that you don't have any essence to what you're talking about. So it's a trap, or a trap isn't the right word, but it is a pitfall you have to be careful of when you are sharing the Dharma with others, that you're not sharing a story just because your teacher said it or because you read it in a book and it's amusing to you. Whenever you're sharing a Dharma story, it should have a point. It should be emphasizing the teaching. It should be bringing the Dharma into some sort of clearer light for the disciple, and it shouldn't just be confusing them. Now, of course, I leave teachings all the time confused because there are a lot of things I don't understand. Okay. So when it says that I leave the disciples confused, it's okay to be confused. But the point is that if you're confused just because you're still struggling to understand the meaning, that's different than being confused because the person talking doesn't know what they're talking about and they're just like, filling as much empty space with words as they can. So, as someone who's sharing the Dharma with others, whether in a relationship of a teaching, a class like this, or even just talking to friends or trying to give advice to friends, whether they're Dharma friends or worldly friends, whether you're using Buddhist language to give that advice or not, you should always make sure that your advice is lining up with the Dharma in a meaningful way. And if you're telling a story, or if you're going out on a limb, or you're kind of being circuitous in the way you explain things, you should always do it in such a way that doesn't leave someone confused, at least not intentionally. I do not despise actions that are unwise and immoral, and instead I dispute and attempt to pick flaws in the excellent teachings and great masters' works. So again, this is clear, right? Since I'm so concerned with my own reputation and I want to be the top of the mountain, the king of the mountain, that when other people uh, have intellectual, treaties, instead of trying to work with them, I try to criticize them. I think this is something we do all the time. I know, especially, when I was in school, in grad school, or not just grad school, undergraduate and grad school, I have one of my degrees is in religion. And so a lot of time you're reading these kind of religious philosophical texts. And you could tell the students who didn't understand the text. Because when you get to a seminar with only 10 students and they're supposed to talk about their experience of the text, and all they do is criticize it. And they criticize the language or they criticize the things they don't like, but they don't ever engage in the meaning that the author or the philosopher is trying to bring about. You can tell that they don't really understand it. And it's so much easier to criticize something than it is to read with it. right? To try to be generous to the text that you're studying, whether that be in a spiritual capacity or an academic capacity. So I always encourage, when you're studying a text, whether it be a religious text or even in a worldly sense, be generous with the reading of the text, right? Give the benefit of the doubt to the text. Try to understand it deeply. And then if you have criticisms for it, they're not based in your initial gut reactionary response, but they're based in your understanding. Okay. And so here, this is pointing out that since I'm unsure of myself, and since I'm unsure of my own understanding, instead of trying to learn something new, it's easier to pick out the small flaws of someone else's work instead of either encouraging them to find ways to improve their work or learning from their work myself. It's easier to point out all the things they did wrong. And, we fall into this habit all the time. So that's what we're trying to avoid in this verse. We're almost done with this section, so it'd be good to finish this today. Oh, good. We still have a little bit of time, and still time for questions as well. Great. Verse 90. I am never embarrassed when I act disgracefully, and only respectable deeds cause me shame. So we talk, I've talked a lot about shame and embarrassment and regret are three mental factors that are useful to cultivate. So here, this is not actual shame. So shame and embarrassment are both what are considered virtuous mental factors. So if you have actual shame and embarrassment, they're virtuous minds. And therefore, what we often label as shame and embarrassment aren't the shame and embarrassment that are being discussed in a Buddhist context. Okay. In fact, what usually we label as shame or embarrassment are self-cherishing. It's trying to cling to a reputation or to seeking out compliments and avoiding criticism. That's what we usually label. If I get up in front of a class and I fall down or I make a fool of myself, then that embarrassment, quote unquote, is just me wanting others to have a good opinion of me. That's not real embarrassment. That's self-cherishing. Here, what we mean by shame and embarrassment are the minds that are recognizing the downfalls of non-virtue and actively working to not engage in non-virtue because we realize that it causes harm, and that to do so would only cause harm to myself or others, right? So when I have that mindset that is preventing myself from engaging in non-virtue because it recognizes to do so is non-beneficial, and I'm not in the presence of others, that is what we call shame. And when I am in the presence of others, or it's an activity that is in relationship to others, that's called embarrassment. So in general, shame and embarrassment happen before we engage in non-virtue. They are the minds that prevent us from engaging in non-virtue, right? That if I do something wrong, I know that it's going to be causing harm to myself or others. And not wanting to have regret because of that non-virtuous action, that is the shame or embarrassment. That wish to not experience regret, right? Because I recognize the harm that are caused by seeking out non-virtue. So generally, having shame and embarrassment, those are preventative mental factors. They can happen as we're engaging in non-virtue, but ultimately they happen before it to prevent the non-virtue from happening. Because then when we engage in non-virtue, that shame or embarrassment would then become regret. And so what regret is, a healthy regret, is recognizing that we've engaged in non-virtue, recognizing that it has not been beneficial to ourselves or to others, and then recognizing that, admitting that freely, seeing the way it caused ourselves harm, and then developing the wish not to want to do that again, right? That's what we mean by regret. We don't mean the idea that I'm a bad person. We don't mean guilt. We don't mean the sensation that I'm worthless because I did this bad thing. That's not useful. That's not healthy. That's not going to bring us closer to enlightenment. What is going to bring us closer to enlightenment is seeing when we engage in harmful actions, identifying those harmful actions, and then committing ourselves to not continuing to participate in those harmful actions. Now, regret, shame, and embarrassment are always virtuous by their very definition, which is why if, what we usually label as shame and embarrassment don't meet the criteria for the Buddhist definition of shame or embarrassment. Usually. Regret, however, is what is called a changeable mental factor. So regret can be virtuous or non-virtuous depending on the object of that regret. So if I regret engaging in non-virtue, that regret itself is a virtuous mind. But if I regret engaging in virtuous activity, then that regret is non-virtuous. So if I made offerings and I regret doing it because I say, oh, I really wish I had that cash because I could go to the movies now, but I already gave it away to the Buddhas or whatever. Geez, how could I do that? that is regretting a virtuous activity, and that is non-virtuous, right? So regret is a changeable mental factor. It can be virtuous or non-virtuous. And so it's very useful. We should cultivate it, but we should always make sure that it is focused on non-virtue and our own non-virtuous actions. You don't regret other people's actions. You regret your own non-virtuous actions. And you do that alongside having shame and embarrassment to prevent participating in those non-virtuous behaviors in the future. Like, that's the purpose of it. Just beating yourself up for things you've already done isn't helpful because you've already done those things, right? You can't undo them. You could do purification work, and part of purification, if we study the four opponent powers, if we want to purify negative karma, having regret for those negative actions is quite important. That's a critical part of purifying negative karma you've created. But you can't undo the negative things you've done, so beating yourself up for it isn't useful. Developing the mindset that I'm a bad person because I did this bad thing, or because I engaged in non-virtue, or because I didn't live up to my own expectations of myself, that's not helpful. Okay. So that is not what we mean by regret. So if you ever have a mind of regret and that mind of regret is making you feel bad about yourself, then take a step back and analyze it and realize that that's probably not regret. That's probably self-cherishing. Most of these kind of minds that are beating up on ourselves are really just self-cherishing minds. They're the flip side of the ego, is to say, like, what a bad person I am, how awful I am. It's, again, focusing all the attention on yourself, right? So that all they are is self-cherishing. Now, of course, there are some people that have mental health issues that are mediated by different chemical situations and by different traumatic events in their life. So I'm not talking about those things, right? When you have those experiences, there's different contemporary ways to help navigate mental health issues, to help navigate chemical imbalances in your brain and in your body, to help navigate traumatic experiences that either cause PTSD or cause other situations. So I'm not saying that those are all invented and you should ignore them. I'm not saying that. But outside of those situations, when you have this mindset that says, look at me, I'm so awful, I'm such a terrible person, that's really just your self-cherishing mind, right? It's just the flip side of the mind that wants to be the best is the mind that wants to be the worst. So we need to get rid of it because it's not helping us. And then the last verse in this section, before we move on to the next section, verse 91 says, all the things I should do, I do not do even once. For improper behavior takes up all of my time. So this is, in some ways, the summary of this whole section. So all of the things I should be doing, all of the activities that align with the Dharma, I don't even do them a single time because I spend all my time engaging in non-virtuous activities or, at best, non-beneficial activities, right? If we study the paramitas, the 6 perfections, the 4th perfection is that of joyful effort, right? And joyful effort is the antidote to laziness. And there are 3 types of laziness. And the first one is just what we think of as laziness, right? Procrastination. The second one is the mind that is saying, I'm not good enough. It's a self-deprecating mind, is a type of laziness. And the third one is the mind that is constantly seeking out non-Dharma activities, that's filling your life with non-Dharma activities. That is, I think, for us, most of the time, the most pernicious type of laziness, because we feel like we're busy. We feel like we are using our time wisely. We're running around. We don't have any free moments. How could I ever be lazy? But the truth is, if all of my time is spent seeking out worldly pleasure or filling myself up with worldly distractions, that is laziness insofar as it is avoiding practicing Dharma in any meaningful way. And so our lives, at least my life, is pervaded by laziness. And so this is reminding me that I know all the things I should be doing. I know what my teachers teach. I know the advice I've been given. I know what the teachings of the Buddha are. I know the different types of meditations that I'm taught, that the mind training teaching presents to me. And instead of doing them even a single time, I seek out worldly happiness. And all the improper behavior, I fill my life with that instead of filling my life with the things that are going to bring me and others actual happiness. Okay, maybe we have time to do, just to get into this next section. I think we can maybe do it all at once, and then we'll have time for questions, okay? So this section we just finished, up through verse 91, is making requests to Yamantaka, and it's pointing out all of the different ways that self-cherishing causes harm in our life. or in my mind. The next section, from verse 92 to 96, is a direct heart request to Yamantaka. So it is no longer pointing out the things I've done wrong, but it is identifying the cause of all of those flaws, which is my self-cherishing mind, and requesting that the ferocious wisdom of all the Buddhas, as well as the ferocious wisdom that I have the capacity for in my own continuum, are able to totally destroy the self-cherishing mind and the self-grasping mind. So that's what these verses are referencing. O mighty destroyer of the selfishness demons, with the body of wisdom unchained from all bonds, Yamantaka, come brandish your skull-headed bludgeon of egoless wisdom, of voidness and bliss, and without any misgivings, now wield your fierce weapon, and wrathfully swing it 3 times round your head. With all of your fierceness, come smash this foul enemy, burst ego concepts with your wisdom's great might. With your boundless compassion, protect us from suffering, the miseries caused by my self-centered actions. Destroy my self-cherishing once and for all. So, just to explain a little bit as we go, right? So again, we see in this first line, Yamantaka, the embodiment of ferocious wisdom, destroys all the demons of selfishness. So we're identifying our self-grasping and our self-cherishing as demons, right? As the things that cause us the most harm. And here, your body of wisdom is referencing your body of a Buddha. You have a perfected body. One of the weapons that Yamantaka holds is this club that has a skull on the end. And he's saying, use this, which represents the wisdom of emptiness and bliss. So especially in Tantric Buddhism, we understand that the union of bliss and emptiness, which is to say the union of bodhicitta and the realization of the nature of reality, are what free us from suffering. So use your weapon, which is the indivisibility of bliss and emptiness, and without any misgiving, take that weapon and destroy my self-cherishing. So here it says, swing it wrathfully 3 times. So the first time, you're destroying self-grasping. The second time, you're destroying self-cherishing. And the third time, you are destroying Zaksheki Pumpo, these contaminated aggregates, right? So as samsaric beings, the very fact that we have the capacity to suffer is due to being born in bodies that are mediated by, that come about due to karma and delusion, right? So that's what's called the most subtle type of suffering, the suffering of all compounded phenomena. Our bodies themselves are made of what we call these contaminated aggregates, and we mistake these contaminated aggregates, the 5 aggregates, as if they were a self, right? We mistake the physical aggregate and the different mental aggregates as if they were a truly existing self. And so this is saying destroy those aggregates, right? And then next, we see the different ways that you can destroy this foul enemy. And so it's shown the different aspects. So first, burst all ego concepts with your wisdom's great might. So wisdom is recognizing the nature of reality. Ego concepts, or self-grasping, is the belief that I truly exist the way I perceive myself to exist. All phenomena exist the way I perceive it. I grasp at the self of persons and the self of phenomena. So wisdom is the antidote to destroy that self-grasping. And then with your compassion, free us from the suffering of the miseries caused by self-centered actions. So here it's saying that one of the primal antidotes to self-cherishing, right, the misery that comes from self-centered actions, is compassion. It's focusing on others, the wish to eliminate the suffering of all their sentient beings. That is what is going to destroy your own self-cherishing mind. The self-cherishing mind is the mind that says my happiness is more important than others, my freedom from suffering is more important than others. So compassion, which is totally focused on eliminating other suffering, is eliminating that self-cherishing mind. So here, this verse is showing how the 2 strongest weapons are the weapon of wisdom, which destroys self-grasping, and the weapon of compassion, or bodhicitta, we could say, which destroys self-cherishing. Now, bodhicitta and compassion aren't the same thing, but they are on a continuum, right? We develop compassion as one of the primary causes to then develop bodhicitta. And with those 2 weapons, right, with those 2 collections of wisdom and method, we are going to destroy self-cherishing, destroy self-grasping, and actually be free from all the suffering of samsara. With all of the sufferings, and so now here, these last 3 verses are giving us the method, right? Or a method. So you'll see that they're talking about Tonglen practice that we mentioned before. With all of the sufferings that others experience, smother completely my selfish concern. The sufferings of others arise from the 5 poisons. Thus, whichever delusion afflicts other beings, take that to smother my own delusions of self. Though I have not a doubt, for I recognize fully the cause and the root of mistakes that we all make, if there is any part of my mind that would tend to support the delusion of a self that I have, then destroy the firm hold of that part of my mind. That, again, our true wishes, makes a fool of myself still. All that is wrong can be traced to one source, my concern for myself, who I cherish the most. I must meditate now on the kindness of others and accept the suffering that they never wished for, and I must dedicate myself fully and all my virtues to all. So within these 3 verses, we're recognizing that the way, one of the techniques to help overcome our self-cherishing is to practice Tonglen, to all the sufferings that others experience. May I take them on myself. May all of my grasping at myself and all of my self-cherishing, which makes that this imaginary self that I grasp to as the most dear thing in the world, may those concepts be destroyed utterly by all the suffering that I'm willing to take onto myself for other sentient beings. May I relieve them of their suffering and willfully encourage that suffering to ripen in my own continuum. And that wish to actually take that suffering, it destroys my self-cherishing because it refuses to let myself and my worldly happiness be the center of my motivation, right? So this is the first half of Tonglen, the taking part of Tonglen. Tonglen, Tong means to give, Len means to receive. But really, we take first, right? And so it really should be Len Tong, to be honest. But so Tong Len, usually when you're encouraged to do it, you use your breath as your meditative object, or as as a tool for meditation. So as you breathe out, you give away your happiness, and as you breathe in, you take in their suffering. But Tong means to give, Len means to take. So here we're starting with taking. We take their suffering, we let it destroy our self-cherishing mind. And then we're saying, even after I do that, after I willingly take on other suffering in my mind and I encourage all of their misery to ripen on me and in the process destroy my self-cherishing and my self-grasping, if there's anything left, please destroy it with your ferocious wisdom, right? Because I recognize, I have confidence that what is causing all of my misery in this life and is setting myself up for all the misery of future lives is my self-cherishing mind, that it itself comes from my self-grasping mind. I recognize that. And so if I'm not able to defeat it on my own, I call upon all the ferocious wisdom of all the Buddhists to help defeat this real enemy that I have, which is my self-cherishing. So that's the second verse. I recognize that that is the root of all my suffering and all of my mistakes. All of my afflicted minds come from my self-grasping. Right? The delusion of a self, right? And so destroy that part of myself that still holds on to this delusion of a self. And then lastly, all of the wrong can be traced to one source, which is my self-grasping mind, which itself is the cause of my self-cherishing mind. My concern for myself, who I cherish the most, that is the cause. And many times in many mind training teachings, you'll say all blame falls to a single point. That single point is the self-cherishing mind. And so once I realize that, I meditate on the kindness of others and I wish to give away all of my virtues, right? So this is the giving part of giving and taking. I take away all of their suffering. I use that suffering to destroy my own self-cherishing, my own opinion that my happiness in this world, in this life right now is most important. And I give away my happiness. I give away all of my virtue. I give away all the benefit I've accumulated in this life to others. And so that's what this verse 96 is referencing. Right? So between 94, 95, and 96 is just giving us, after we make these heart requests of Yamantaka, it's giving us a picture of the antidote, which is Tonglen as a practice. And now, as I mentioned at the beginning, the beauty of engaging in Tonglen meditation is it is making our minds concordant with the actual antidotes to self-cherishing. Right? So as you engage in Tonglen, you actually work on yourself, willingly taking on suffering from others and giving away your happiness. Then when you experience self-cherishing during the day, you notice your self-cherishing mind acting. Then the instinct to adopt whatever the appropriate antidote is right there. You don't fight against it. You don't wallow in your own self-cherishing. You don't say, I would get rid of this mind of jealousy, but right now it feels good to be jealous. Right? That's what our instinct is. We wallow in our own miserable self-cherishing minds because that's what we're used to. And because it scares us to break free of the self-cherishing mind because that's been our habit for so long. But if we do this Tonglen practice, right, we do it in the safety of our own homes, of our own gopa, on our meditation cushion, then we build up the emotional resources that when we actually have to apply those antidotes in our everyday life, they're right there. They're available to us. We don't hesitate, right? So that's what we combine these different types of meditation we're talking about. The first one, which is what this text is really showing us, especially this section that we covered today, showing us how to identify all the different ways our self-cherishing mind is acting in our life. And once we're able to become familiar with it, then we need to apply the antidote. And Tonglen gives us the emotional and psychological structure to apply the antidote readily without hesitation. So I think that's a good place for us to stop today. What do we have any questions? We still have some time for questions. So I would love to cover any of those if we have any.
Venerable, could you please explain again what you how you defined shame?
So again, first off, the difference between shame and embarrassment, it just has to do with the audience. If you're by yourself or if you're in a group of others, or if the action itself is only relating to you or relating to others. So this definition it covers both of those, right? And what I mean by shame, it's very similar to regret. But you think of regret as after you've already done a negative action, right? When you look at an action you've done that was inappropriate and you say, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. All that did is cause me suffering and cause others suffering. That's regret, right? So what shame is the motivating factor to prevent you from engaging in that action in the first place. So shame in that way is recognizing that if I engage in such and such an action, it is going to be non-virtuous and it's going to cause me regret. So shame is a mental factor that prevents, that recognizes the deleterious consequences of negative actions that are done by oneself in the privacy of one's own, in privacy without an audience, and in an attempt to not cultivate regret or to not allow a source of regret for those actions, prevents them from happening in the first place. I think the important thing for shame and embarrassment for us is to try to distance them from the contemporary or conventional use of the term, right? So when I say I'm embarrassed of something or I'm ashamed of something, often I'm ashamed of things that are out of my control. Like I'm ashamed of the way I look, or I'm ashamed of the way I speak, or I'm ashamed of these things that aren't really that have nothing to do with me. They're out of my control. And really, I'm ashamed of them because they present a picture of myself that isn't how I want myself to be presented, right? So it's really my self-cherishing mind saying, I want people to see me a certain way. I want people to think of me a certain way. And if I don't project that in the way that I want, then that is a source of shame for me, right? Now, to be fair, shame also, we're told we should be ashamed of ourselves, right? Culture tells us we should be ashamed of ourselves or embarrassed of ourselves. And then the reason is, if I'm going to be honest and political, is because of capitalism, because they want us to buy the things that are going to get rid of that shame and embarrassment. Like buy this thing and it'll make you beautiful. Buy this thing and it'll fix you, right? So you should be embarrassed of what you look like. You should be embarrassed of how you act or how you dress, because if you're embarrassed enough, then you can buy this thing I'm going to sell you and that will make you better. So a lot of our shame and embarrassment comes from culture, right? We are taught that we have to compare ourselves to others, and that isn't helpful. But all it does, and while that's true, right, the precipitating causes are coming from the outside. We're taught we should be embarrassed of ourselves. It really is our self-cherishing mind that's doing the work. Those are the causes that are encouraging our self-cherishing mind. So conventional ideas of shame and embarrassment are usually focused on protecting our image or our ego or the sense of self that we have projected or we want to project. So those aren't useful ways to think about shame and embarrassment in a Buddhist context, because in a Buddhist context, the only thing we should ever regret is engaging in non-virtue. That is what is the source of our regret, right? And so in order to prevent that regret, we need to not engage in non-virtue. And in order to encourage us not to engage in non-virtue and to protect our morality, shame and embarrassment prevent us from engaging in those harmful activities. And when we do engage in non-virtuous activities, it reminds us that that's not something I want to do. Following my self-cherishing mind, following the self-grasping mind, following my reactionary emotional states is not how I want to be in the world. And the reason isn't because I don't want to be criticized. It's because I know that it's only going to bring about suffering for myself and for others. So that's what I'm talking about with shame and embarrassment.
Venerable.
Okay, go ahead, Madhvi.
Okay, thank you. Venerable, but what if, like, isn't Tonglen also a somewhat, I don't know, narcissistic practice? Because I know I can't, take, I can't give away my happiness, and I know that others' pain and suffering cannot come to me. So, but I'm using that to break my self-cherishing mind. So all I'm doing is, like, even though I know it's not possible, I'm just thinking that, for me, my self-cherishing mind is something that I want to crush at all costs. And
Yeah, I understand. So
yeah.
the thing, I would not call it, no, it's not a narcissistic practice. And the reason is you're not harming others, right? Like, you're not saying to others, I'm going to take your suffering away, and then going about this meditative practice that isn't actually taking away their suffering, right? So you're not doing the practice in such a way that you're giving others false hope that what you're going to do is relieve them of their suffering. So the practice, the point of Tonglen and all of our meditative practices is to realign our mental and emotional habits to always be focused on virtue. And so since we spend so much of our life trying to protect our self-cherishing mind, our image of ourself, to seek out our own happiness and our worldly delight, that actively creating a mental space where that is not prioritized, where what is prioritized is others' happiness, and having a willingness to take on suffering, even though I know I can't take your suffering away from you, that I can't take your whatever, your displeasure, your unhappiness, your pain, even though I know that I can't take it, if I develop the willingness to do that, then that's going to affect how I relate to others, right? So it's much easier to have a sense of compassion when I'm willing to take your suffering away from you. And it's much easier when I'm in community with others or in communion with others to treat them in such a way that brings about their temporary, worldly, and spiritual happiness if I have already created the habit of being willing to give up my own happiness for them and to give up my own sense of immediate satisfaction to bring about their satisfaction, even if that means I'm making my life more inconvenient in the process, right? So I don't think it's narcissistic. I think if you believe that what I'm actually doing is saving the world, then it's easy to get an ego, right? If you say, like, what I'm doing is the most important thing in the world and I'm going to eliminate everyone from their suffering, it's easy to let that fall into an ego. I understand that. And if you tell people that I'm going to take your suffering away from you, and then you go and do Tonglen practice, as opposed to, like, giving them a meal when they're hungry, then that is also not appropriate, right? But that's not what we're doing, and that's not what we're encouraging. Our practice, the Tonglen, is meant to rearrange the way we experience our own worldly desires and our own fear of discomfort, and to rearrange our habits and our instinct, to make our instinct one that doesn't shy away from those things that make us uncomfortable, but instead lean into them if that means we can bring about benefit to others. Does that
Yes,
help a little
thank
bit?
you.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
If
Thank
our
you.
meditation practice, whether it's Tonlen practice or mindfulness practice or compassion or whatever meditation we do, if that never changes the way we relate to the world around us, the way we treat others, then the practice isn't doing its job, right? It may be helping us out a little bit, but the point of meditating, the point of transforming our minds, is to then live in the world in a more meaningful way, right? So Tonglen is one way to do that. Getting rid of your self-cherishing mind then allows you to be in community in ways that are much more beneficial to others. But also just being mindful, developing mindfulness should allow you to go live about your life in a way that is more meaningful, that is more pointed towards Buddhahood as opposed to suffering, right? So whatever our meditation practice is, it should not be constrained to our meditation cushion. It has to start there. That's where we build up the muscle, but then it has to follow us into our everyday life. Otherwise, we're only doing a partial practice.
Yes, I
Venerable,
Shruti,
understand.
did you have a question?
small
Thank you.
doubt.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate harsh speech, which is like in, I mean, you notice some self-cherishing in people who are close to you, and you, instead of keeping quiet, if you point it out to them, how is that different from self-cherishing? Is it different or is it the same? Is it self-cherishing itself in a different form where you're noticing
I'm sorry.
faults in others rather than in yourself?
I'm sorry. When you don't point out something to someone else that you're close to, is that what you
Yeah,
said?
yeah.
So the definition of harsh speech is speech that is intended to cause harm, right? And so
Mm.
if you are giving valid and helpful criticism to someone in such a way that they can receive it, then that wouldn't be harsh speech necessarily. But you have to also just be pragmatic. And I know that if someone is not receptive to my criticism, then even if it's not harsh speech to give that criticism, it's not going to benefit them, right? So you have to make sure your motivation is correct, that your motivation is to benefit them in the immediate sense and in the long-term sense, and also identify if this is a skillful way to go about bringing about that benefit. So both of those things have to happen. So it wouldn't be self-cherishing if your motivation is proper. If you notice that someone's engaging in a behavior that is not helpful or is harmful, and you believe you can offer a constructive criticism that would discourage that harmful behavior, and that your motivation is not because you want to show off that you know the Dharma better than them, or that you're a better person than them, or that you're a better meditator than them, but your motivation is you genuinely want them to cease causing the causes of their own suffering, right? Then if you have that genuine motivation, then it's not harsh speech. But then you also have to combine that with the wisdom, the worldly wisdom that says, is this the best way to go about helping them? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes people aren't receptive to certain types of feedback. So you have to combine a proper motivation with a little bit of worldly knowledge that says, what is the most effective way I can help this person in this circumstance?
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question, Venerable. Thank you for the discussion.
Yes, Dr.
So,
Shruti.
yeah. Um, like most of us, like, we've been practicing like meditation in our daily life, the spiritual practice for 1 hour. So, as you said, we have to align our mental and emotional faculties, and then we have to immerse these meditation practice into our daily lives. Is it correct? What
Yes,
if
yes,
I've
yes.
understood?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the purpose of meditation is to prepare ourselves to go into the world and bring about the virtue and the beneficial activities that we want to be living all the time. If you're just an expert meditator, but then that never leaves your meditation room, then it's not very beneficial. So the purpose of meditation is to help rearrange our mind, to help rearrange our emotional state, and then we use that to engage in the world around us. So, we have to do both. Okay, I think that's a good place to end. That's a good question to end on. I don't want to keep anyone too late. Let's just do some very brief, I know we already went over time, but let's do some brief dedication prayers. Let's recognize that by studying the Dharma together today, by studying our minds, by committing ourselves to practice, we have accumulated some virtue. And instead of keeping that virtue for ourselves, we generate the wish that we could give it away, that all of our merit could be ripened on other sentient beings, that they might quickly experience relief from all suffering, and that we ourselves might quickly and more quickly become Buddhas, so that we might be of benefit to others. And so we'll offer these two brief verses of dedication. We'll offer the first one once in Tibetan and then once in English, and then we'll offer a long life prayer for His Holiness in English. Choe Khor Sum Ling Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyu Ching Ke Wa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gon Ne Gon Du Pe Wa Sho. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I think we'll end it there this evening. I've already kept you later than usual. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, everyone. I appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week or tomorrow for those who will join us tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Venerable. Tomorrow morning. Thank you, Venerable. Can we all please stand up and do 3 prostrations and end the session? Thank you all so much. We'll end the session here today. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we have Venerable teaching on Acharya Shantideva's the Bodhisattva way of life. Please join back at 10 o'clock. Thank you. Bye.